Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for that very kind, well, I think it was a kind introduction. The part about me knowing everything there is to know about the OECD, I suspect it's because I've been there so long, so you think I'm really old and I have all that great knowledge. No, I know. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here, and certainly the choice of this topic is particularly timely given the President's recent visit to the United States and Trump's announcement of his support for Brazil joining the OECD. So this makes our discussion very timely. Oh, there they are, okay. I do want to start off, before I get into the process of accession to the OECD, to talk about what Brazil is already doing with the OECD, how Brazil is already very much engaged in our work. And so here, and I know because I was sitting in the back, you probably can't see this slide very well, but this slide basically depicts our Committee on Fiscal Affairs, which is where all of the tax work of the OECD is carried out in the within the OECD. Obviously, because tax is not an end in itself, but is linked to so many other policy areas such as environment, health, labor, pensions, hot topic here, I know. We also collaborate very much with the rest of the OECD, but the core of the work is carried out in this committee, and you can see it's a very complex structure. In addition to the committee, we have below the committee 10 core working groups that work on things like tax treaties, transfer pricing, exchange of information, aggressive tax planning, etc. We also, on the side, you see, we have the Global Forum on Transparency, which is separate, a somewhat independent body of the OECD. Brazil is involved in all of these activities. It is a full member of the Global Forum. It is what we call a participant in the Committee on Fiscal Affairs, but it is also an associate in the BEPS project, meaning it is a full member of the BEPS project. And for those of you who have been following the BEPS project, which, by the way, is not yet done, implementation is still going on, and the work we are doing on tax and digitalization is a key component of that and is very much still underway. Brazil is a full member of that work, and in fact, even before we established our inclusive framework on BEPS, Brazil, because it's a G20 country, was already participating in the development of the different measures. So just to give you that idea, here as you can see, it's also in the broader landscape of the OECD. It has been a key partner in the OECD since 2007. There are only 5 countries that are key partners in the OECD, and there was a determination at the level of the OECD Council of which countries outside of the OECD were of strategic importance and countries that the OECD wanted to get closer to. You'll see also on this slide the mention of the Forum on Tax Administration. The Secretary Sintra, is right now in Santiago participating in that meeting. That group brings together the tax commissioners of over 50 countries, the largest countries and the most advanced countries, to discuss and develop and improve tax administration policies and practices. So that is a very important group. You see also, as I mentioned already, the inclusive framework on BEPS. Brazil has already been undergoing the peer reviews that are carried out in this process and is doing very well. On Action 5, which is the harmful tax practices work, the one regime they the one regime you have, was reviewed and considered not to be a harmful regime. On the exchange of rulings, Brazil has already been reviewed and has received a good outcome on that. On Action 6, which is addressing treaty abuse, Brazil has chosen not to sign our multilateral convention, but rather to adopt the approach of taking bilateral measures within its tax treaties, so either updating existing tax treaties or incorporating the new standards in new treaties. And then Action 13, which has to do with the country-by-country reporting, Brazil has carried out and undertaken all the legislative measures it needs to do. So again, very good on that score. And then the Action 14, dispute resolution, very important. That review is underway now. So you could see that already Brazil is very engaged in a lot of our work. The Global Forum, as I mentioned, Brazil has been a member for quite some time, since 2009. It has had very good reviews, largely compliant, which is the second highest rating. It has also just started, consistent with our timeline, the automatic exchange of financial account information, which is very important to enable Brazil to fight offshore tax evasion. And so that was a very important step that was completed in the last 6 months. And then it has ratified the multilateral convention, which we have, which is the most comprehensive convention in the world for cooperating on administrative tax matters. And as a result of that, it will be able to cooperate eventually with the over 120 signatories to that convention. So quite important. Transfer pricing, I bet everyone in this room knows that there is a difference, or more than one difference, between the current transfer pricing rules of Brazil and the transfer pricing rules of the OECD. Last year, many of you will have participated in the launch of a new initiative to try and analyze Brazil's transfer pricing system, compare it to the OECD system, and identify gaps and opportunities in that. And that is what we have been working on. And in fact, that is why I was in Brasilia earlier this week to continue the discussions with Receita about how we can try to bridge those gaps. And that work has included a survey of business and other stakeholders to get more information about what is working in the Brazilian system, what is not, what could be improved. All of that information has been extremely useful in this process, and we have had very constructive discussions. This process was started really to get a better understanding without so much thinking that accession might be imminent, although Brazil had made its request a couple of years ago to join the OECD. But this, I think, has provided a really good opportunity for Brazil, Receita, to consider the differences and weaknesses of their system, strengths of their system, as well as the OECD system, to try and consider whether changes can be made, what options could be taken to bridge the gap between the two systems. And we have made great progress in those discussions, and those discussions are ongoing. In terms of other engagement, we, separate and apart from all of the committee standard-setting work, we also carry out training programs together to improve the understanding of different areas of our work. And then a big component of what the OECD does is gather evidence and information and data from its members. And through that, we are able to develop policies in different areas, and of course in the tax area. And here you could see that Brazil is already included in many of our key statistical publications. For example, the revenue statistics on Latin America and the Caribbean just came out on Monday. The Tax Administration Comparative Information Series is a key one that is prepared by the Forum on Tax Administration to help tax administrations compare themselves. And then you have some other ones related to environmental issues. Now, with that perspective of what Brazil is already doing, we can now look at what is the process for accession, because it is not simply a question of Brazil seeking to join the organization and then the organization saying yes. There is a whole process to review essentially the like-mindedness of the country and the willingness and ability to implement the OECD standards and legal instruments. And so the first step in this process has not yet taken place. That first step is for the OECD Council to determine to open the accession discussions. Once that is made, that decision is made, then there is a roadmap that is developed to guide the process, because this process does not happen overnight, and so we have to develop a process that is workable for both the OECD and for Brazil. Then there is an initial memorandum that is agreed where Brazil would set out its position on all of the legal instruments and recommendations of the OECD, whether they accept them, whether they would implement them at a later stage, etc. So there's this whole process of review of those instruments. And then there is a process of review by the different committees. And this is where the information I described earlier about Brazil's engagement is so important, because the tax committee is, of course, one of the key committees that will carry out this review. But there are usually about 20 committees of the OECD that carry out these types of reviews. Then once the committee has completed its review, it provides a formal opinion to the OECD Council. Once all of the committees have completed that, then there is a determination, and then we proceed to the signing of an agreement with Brazil, and then it has to be cleared through your internal processes, any constitutional requirements you may have. So here I'm just showing the current state of play, the countries that are in the process, and you can see that Colombia initiated this process in 2013, and they still have not yet taken the final step. So this process can take a minimum of 2 years. For example, Chile got through the process in about 2 years. Colombia, the final step really is in their hands. It has to go through the ratification of their parliament, and we expect that very soon. The reason we don't have a decision yet is because there are a number of other countries that have also sought to join the OECD, and so the Council is trying to consider how to deal with these various requests, because as you can see from the process I described, there are some countries that consider that this process of review is time-consuming for the committees, and they would not want to overburden the committees with reviewing too many countries, which would then result in maybe setting aside the core work of developing policies. And so these are the countries currently in the pipeline, and they will be considering this. I cannot tell you, I'm sure the question on your minds is, when will a decision be taken? I don't have the answer to that question. We just need to wait and see for the Council to make a decision. Now, very quickly, because I think this is also something you are interested in, is, well, what is the review that takes place? We have 8 core principles in the tax area, the first one related to tax treaties. And it is not a question of Brazil having to adhere to every single thing in our model tax convention. The model is a model, and there are reservations and observations, and so our Working Party 1 will review that on the basis of the core elements. The next thing is the data I already mentioned, transfer pricing. BEPS, as I already mentioned, Brazil is implementing BEPS already quite effectively. Then exchange of information, they have already done a lot in that area. VAT is one area where they have not participated that much, and so we'll need to see how those guidelines relate to that, to the current Brazilian system, which I know is largely subnational, so that will be an interesting question. And then we have some recommendations on fighting tax crimes, which essentially relate to having greater interagency cooperation. And finally, as I mentioned, the tax administration series. So I'm not going to have too much time to talk about tax and the digital economy, but here you have a reminder of where we left this topic in BEPS. Action 1, we said you cannot ring-fence the digital economy. We did not resolve the wider issues that were raised in terms of direct tax questions, but we did discuss 3 options: an equalization levy, withholding tax, and a significant economic presence test, and we agreed to return to the issue in 2020. Well, it's not 2020, and we returned to the issue anyway because the G20 couldn't wait. There's great political frustration that there wasn't a solution in 2015, and we have already seen a number of unilateral measures, which is why we have come back to the issue. What we produced in 2018, about a year ago from today, was a descriptive report, but also one where we had countries agree that we would review the existing nexus and profit allocation rules, which, as was mentioned before, are about 100 years old. Now, since then, we have tried to figure out how we would refine those rules. We don't have a single solution yet. We had a public consultation a few weeks ago, and so for those of you who watched it or attended it, you will know that we have 3 proposals looking at nexus and profit allocation that differ widely. Then we have a second pillar that is really a backstop to the first pillar. And so if we go through very quickly, the first option that was proposed principally by the United Kingdom is very much focused on user contributions. So looking at adapting the rules and changing them so that you focus on the user's contribution as a measure of value creation. The second one is a bit more complex, much wider in scope, focusing on marketing intangibles as a way to measure value creation for purposes of nexus and profit allocation. And the third one is the significant economic presence test. This was a proposal put forward by the G24, of which Brazil is a member. The pillar 2, as I said, is a backstop. It's essentially a global minimum tax to ensure that profits cannot be shifted to low-tax jurisdictions when, under these new rules, the income should be in the market jurisdiction. We issued the policy note in January, which set out briefly these proposals, and then circulated a public consultation document, which was the basis of our discussions a few weeks ago. What are the next steps? Well, a lot of our work is driven by the G20. The next finance ministers meeting is June 8th and 9th. So our next inclusive framework meeting at the end of May will try to produce a work program. We will not narrow all of these proposals down to one, but we will try to refine them and then see how we develop them further. Thank you very much.